His flat sat on the edge of the slum bowl, where most buildings would be waist-deep in muck come spring. But Horace's place sat just high enough to stay dry. Come flood season, his building would become one of the only sanctuaries in the slums, and that made it valuable in its own way. Until it sank into the grub ways too, of course. The brick was scrawled with chalk tags and paint daubs, some fresh and biting, others faded to ghost paint. Bottles and scraps littered the stoop. The entryway reeked of piss and mildew. The stairwell had clearly been beautiful once. Carved banisters, decorative molding, murals long faded into shadows. But it had all fallen from grace. These days, it was home to the squatters and piss pools until the blackcoats came through to clear them out. Horace kept to himself, and for the most part, they left him alone. He stepped through the warped door to his flat, took care to lock it behind him, and let out a long breath. Everything was just as he left it. He shed his grimy skin like a serpent in the same order every time. His coat went to the hook by the door, followed by his bowler hat. He always made sure the folds of the coat tail hung just right. Didn't like it when they looked too haphazard. Made him itch for some reason. Next thing to come off were his boots. He couldn't take more than 4 steps into his home before taking them off and placing them in the bottommost shelf of the bookcase. 4. Any more than that, and he'd be up all night scrubbing the whole flat. Then his shirt came off and was folded neatly and placed on a table in the corner of the room to be washed later on in the week. He noticed a drop of blood on the collar and instantly made for the mirror. He looked himself over to see a splotch of dried blood on his collarbone. He felt his stomach twist in knots. Usually, he used the small wash basin in his kitchen to scrub the rot away, but it had touched him. He wouldn't be able to sleep now unless he scrubbed. He wouldn't be able to scrub without water, and though he preferred it warm, a doctor in the city had once told him that cold water constricted the pores of the skin, keeping what was outside out. Damn, but he wished he didn't know that. He'd never be able to take a warm bath again. He wouldn't have time to heat it anyway. This couldn't wait. The stain was already crawling under his skin and he could feel it. He filled the copper tub with water straight from the barrel, cold and heavy, the kind that bit through the skin on first touch. When it was full enough, he stripped bare and climbed in, jaw clenched as the chill closed around his ribs. He hissed air through his teeth but didn't stop. The soap was rough, a block of lye that burned in the cracks of his knuckles, but he scrubbed anyway, hard, methodical. Neck first, then arms, then the collar line where the blood had soaked through. He imagined the water carrying the filth away, imagined the tub draining it all into the grubway beneath the city. 4 passes with the cloth, always 4. He washed until his skin was raw and pink, until his breath steamed in the air, until his mind stopped playing the image of blood over and over again. And then he sat still, knees drawn up, water gone gray around him. The cold didn't matter anymore, only the quiet, for a while at least. Then there was a faint sound, a whisper almost. He paused, and the water froze with him. And there it was again, the dry rasp of something small, teeth or claws on wood. He listened a while longer, eyes bouncing from one wall to the next, waiting for it to come again. As he waited and glanced around his home, his eyes drifted to the bedroom door that was left open just a crack. Through it, he saw the goddamn doll perched on the bedside table, one button eye staring straight back at him. He hated that goddamn doll. It carried the stench of the city with it wherever he took it, but it was the only sliver of the outside world he allowed in his immaculate home. The scratching sound picked up again. Horace sprang to his feet in the tub, nearly slipping, water dripping from his bony frame, then grasped for a fresh towel. As he wrapped it around his body, he heard it come once more, clear as crystal. Horace didn't hate rats out there. He understood them out there. They had their place and they played their part, and it was out there where they were meant to do it, in the alleys, in the trenches, in the filthy, filthy world. Not here. Not his home. Oh, they had tried to burrow in before, but Horace stayed ready. The rot was not allowed in these walls. It would do well to give this sacred flat a wide berth, lest it finds itself ensnared in a snap trap. He didn't even bother to dress in undergarments. He moved quickly and with purpose, checking every cabinet and cupboard, every corner of the pantry. No droppings, no holes. He checked the traps next. Snappers for mice, sticky boards for creepers, little cages for anything larger. They were all baited, and they were all empty. Then, finally, he stepped to the wall above his bed. A small object hung over his pillow, his bone catcher. A crude ring of wire threaded with brittle teeth and knuckle bones, strung together by strands of hair too dark to be his. It swayed when he breathed, soft as a spider's web, meant to snag whatever came creeping in the night that normal traps would be powerless to stop. He reached up and gently touched it, just to feel it was still there. Sometimes the world was filth, and sometimes it was something worse. Horace didn't know exactly what he believed, but he knew enough to fear it, and rightly so. He felt the wave of exhaustion wash over him. He needed a sleep. He needed a rest. But the scratching continued, and he went from room to room hunting for the source, leaving a trail of water behind his steps. But no matter where he went, the scratching followed. One moment it was in the wall nearest him. The next, it was across the room. Then it was in a cupboard he'd already checked 3 times. He almost felt like he was being toyed with. Horace knew he had a fragile mind, but he kept that a secret from the world. He covered his tracks well enough that no one and no thing could ever know his weakness. How could this little rat know? Horace knew how to fix the little bastard, though. Fix it good and proper. He marched to his toolbox, one hand holding the towel around his waist, the other dove into the box, and from it he produced a hammer. He didn't know where to start, but he knew he wouldn't stop until the scratching did, and he'd burn this place down before he was able to sleep, with filth in his home. He picked a wall. It didn't seem to matter which wall, so the one between his bedroom and living area would do. He'd start with the blunt end, and rip the wall down in chunks with the clawed end. Horace was dead set on it now. There would be no rest for him until this was dealt with and finished. He sucked a breath in through his nose and reared his hammer back. Then there came a knock at the door. His hand froze. The rapping of knuckles came again. The scratching had stopped. Another knock came, slower now, but persistent. He crept to the door, weapon low and ready. He opened it, slow, careful, and blinked in surprise. A woman stood there, a lady of the night by the looks of her. Painted eyes, wind-blown hair, a dress that had seen better nights.
"Please," she whispered. "There's a man in this building, and he's looking for me, and I just need somewhere to hide."
Horace didn't respond at first. He looked her up and down, and she was filthy. She reeked of it. He already had one uninvited guest he aimed to tend to before going to bed. He didn't need another. "Sorry, can't help you," he said, and went to snap the door shut.
"Sir, please. I mean you no harm, but this man means me. Please, I can pay you. I just need to hide for an hour or 2, and I'll be gone."
One of the dirty, piss-coated men lying in the stairwell piped up then.
"Oi, lovely bird. I got somewhere you can hide."
Then he opened his coat wide to reveal his naked and filthy body.
"It's tight quarters, though."
The man cackled a broken half-laugh, half-cough, and the whole stairway erupted with the cruel and venomous burbling of laughter from men. The girl looked back at Horace. Her chin quivered a bit. One of her eyes was already bloodshot and surrounded by a darkening bruise. He sighed, and then he stepped aside. She hurried in, breath catching in her throat. "I'll put on some tea." Steam curled between them from a dented tin mug. Her hands shook. His didn't. Horace hadn't had much opportunity to brush up on his conversation skills in a long while, and thus he hadn't the first clue of what to say to ease her frayed nerves. Truth be told, he couldn't think anything to say besides, "Don't touch anything," or, "If you have to sit, only do it in one spot and don't move." He said neither of these things. Horace, at the very least, knew how not to be an ass to a lady, gutter bell or not. He did, however, excuse himself to go get some real clothes on, and when he returned, he covered a chair with another fresh towel for her to sit on.
Thank you so much for letting me in. You didn't have to.
Think nothing of it. It's the decent thing to do.
No one does the decent thing anymore.
While he knew that was true, his mind was still fixed on the scratching. It had stopped since inviting her in, but he listened for it still. Through the idle conversation and empty questions about nothing that mattered, he listened. Then a look came over her. Horace knew that look. Guilt. Before he could say anything about it, she was on her knees. Her hand was on his thigh. Oh, no, you don't have to do that.
We must greet kindness with kindness, as the tongues of the pillars say.
There was a look in her eye, and something behind it. Her hand slid up his leg. He went to push her off, but she swatted him away. She stood up, both hands on his chest now, and she was pressing him down into his armchair. What are you doing?
Don't you recognize me?
Just then, right in front of his eyes, her face changed. It molded into another. Her wet hair draped down from her head and tickled his cheeks, and in the shadow, she looked just like Maria.
Don't you know who I am?
She smiled with that same sweet smile. He'd missed that smile. His breath caught in his throat, and then her skin went sickly pale. Eyes widened and went milky white. It was the gutter bell now, the one he had tossed into the grubway that night, bloated and blue, skin slick with decay. Laughter bubbled from her smile. Her flesh boiled and split. The sore on her plump bottom lip oozed with pus. Dull red scratches from small claws streaked down her arms, over her face, and gouged her eyes. Her flesh began to rip and tear in small, messy little bits, as if 1,000 invisible rats gnawed at her flesh before him. And then she froze, face still as the gray water in his tub, eyes wide, mouth wider. A thin, red string of drool dangled from the shredded tip of her tongue. Then she burst. Rats ripped through her abdomen, ants filled her raisin-wrinkled eyes, clumps of maggots poured from her throat and chittered over her slimy tongue, cockroaches clicked under her blue skin, eating their fill. Hundreds of spiders rained down from her stringy hair. Horace kicked and squirmed and screamed, but she held him in place as pieces of her and her inhabitants rained down over him. She laughed a laugh that almost sounded like a sob. Through the 100 chittering legs that swarmed her face, she smiled with black teeth. Horace jerked awake in bed, his pillow soaked in sweat. It had been a dream. Only a dream. He rubbed his eyes and breathed slowly to calm down. Instinct took over, and he reached for the other side of the bed. He'd always suffered from awful night terrors, and in his experience, there was only one cure. But she was gone now. Across the bed, on the nightstand, there sat the doll. Its soot-stained cloth face stared right back with one button eye, the other a hollow stitch of thread. Above his bed, the bone catcher had been snapped from the ceiling, leaving only a bit of dark hair dangling. He flung out of bed, rubbing his eyes and scanning the room. In the far corner sat the frayed bone catcher, now only held together by a few remaining strands of hair. Horace felt like he needed another bath, but before he could even think to do anything about it, behind him, from the wall the headboard rested against, there came a low, muted, scratching sound. He wanted to weep. He thought that was a dream as well, and just as he was about to crumble, he realized something. Behind the bed. He hadn't checked the wall behind the bed. Horace ripped the bed frame from where it sat. Floorboards squealed as the frame gouged the wood. And there it was, a hole at the bottom of the wall. Thoughts of the nasty little vermin scurrying over his counter at night flashed through his mind, climbing over the bed, over him. He put the thoughts out of his head with an effort.
No, now. Now we work.
Horace got to his knees and began his examination. The hole was much larger than he thought, big enough to put a hand inside. He put his cheek to the floor and peered in. It was dark and deep, and a faint draft wafted over his face. And there, in the dark, black eyes glinted back at him. And they didn't move, and they didn't blink. He thought about fetching a rat trap, and thought about laying it in front of the hole with a nice big chunk of cheese as bait. He thought that would be the smart thing, probably the best thing. But the filthy little bastard was right there. He could see it, and he wanted it gone. Not later, not tonight, now. The little bastard wasn't far in, he figured. Slowly, he watched as his fingers disappeared into that hole, and then his palm, and then his arm, all the way up to his elbow.
Just get the fucking cunt out now, right now, and be done with it, he thought.
He felt around a bit. Through his fingertips, he felt the soft debris of chewed dust and crumbs of food. He jumped as he felt his arm brush up against a pipe, and then felt little whiskers grazing his skin. The little fucker was sniffing him. Wasn't he afraid? Just as afraid as Horace was of an intruder in his home? He supposed not. He glided his hand down the side of the rat's damp fur, felt the ribs and twitching muscles, then the tail. Horace took a deep breath through his nose and dove deep. He gripped the rat's backside, hands slipping and sliding, looking for an anchor point. He found it, forefinger and thumb fixed on the ass end, thumb hooked on what Horace thought was the hip, the other three fingers wrapped tight around the tail. He felt the teeth sink deep into his knuckle and he winced, but a job started's gotta be finished. The rat scratched and bit and twisted in on itself. It squealed for Horace to stop, only making him squeeze all the tighter. So tight he felt like he might squish the life out of the fleshy little wretch, and pulled. He could see his wrist now, pink little rat tail flailing out the hole, but he couldn't pull any further. Then, something gripped him. Horace was pulled back into the hole, back up to his elbow, past it. He let out a helpless squeal that sounded too much like the rat's cries for help. He pressed his free hand against the wall as hard as he could, but he was only pulled in deeper, so deep the hole had expanded against his shoulder. He could feel his arm being pulled and yanked and thrusted upon like the powerless piece of meat he was. He begged them to stop through damp eyes and a raspy throat. Then he realized he was still clinging to the rat in his grip, and he let go. And then he was released. He felt the darkness fade from his arm all at once and crumbled back from the hole, banging his head on the back of the headboard as he did so. His arm was in one piece, but blood ran in thick streams down from his hand and dripped from his elbow. Between the hoarse and rapid breaths he took, he heard something coming from the hole. It was almost like a taunt, a single claw dragging itself slow across the wood, like a toothy grin giving sound. And then it grew. The sound of one rat scratching became two, and then four, then eight. It doubled, then doubled again, and again, until it fell into a rhythm, a pulse. The scratching spread like a fever along the baseboards, then up to the ground molding, skittering along the ceiling, filling the corners, scratching in cadence, scratching like a chant. It wasn't random, it was deliberate. 100 tiny claws keeping time together, like a tribe around a fire, slapping drumsticks and shaking bone rattles, singing a wordless song of victory. They weren't just moving, they were mocking him. They were telling him he'd been bested, that the home was no longer his, that his walls no longer answered to him. Horace lay on the floor, curled and helpless, cupping his hands to his ears, teeth bared and maybe screaming. If he was, he couldn't hear it. The sound built higher and faster, tightening around him like a noose. The one-eyed doll stared down at him without emotion. The scratching peaked into a crescendo, a furious, deafening roar of claws and teeth on wood. and it only grew all the louder. Well, howdy, traveler, and thank you for sitting in on episode 2 of Rotwork. Episode 3 will be along next week, but if you're intrigued, and if you want to see where this rot takes Horace, feel free to subscribe wherever you're listening. If you're a fan and you want more, you can find From Shallow Graves on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And if you're a little like me, you ain't got much patience. So if you'd rather not wait, click the link to my Patreon. You'll get early access to all the episodes, plus a behind-the-scenes look at what all goes into making this show. If you've a mind to contribute to the world of From Shallow Graves, I'd be mighty pleased to hear from you. Follow the link in the description to join our Reddit community, where you might just find yourself telling your own story by this very fire. Today's episode was written and performed by Red Edwards. Until next time, traveler, keep your lantern lit, 'cause remember, we ain't alone out here.